Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let folks come in, socially distance, of course, but just wanted to kick off today's Capital Budget Subcommittee budget hearings. Just so you all know what the order will be today, you all should have received it anyway. We're going to go Board of Public Works, Morgan State, Maryland Department of Environment, Maryland Environmental Service, the Maryland Independent Colleges, and then Baltimore City Community College. As in our previous budget hearings, what will happen is we'll call up the analysts first, and then we'll hear the agency responses. So with that, we will start with Patrick Frank for the Board of Public Works. Mr. Frank.
All right, we'll go ahead and begin with the Board of Public Works. There are 4 projects in the budget for the Board of Public Works, and they're getting $55 million in fiscal 2023, and it's all general obligation bonds. There are also 3 programs which are getting $116 million in fiscal 2023. I'm just going to mention on this one here, the fuel storage tank is getting $1 million. That was the amount that was scheduled for it, and it's for the Northeast Barrack in Cecil County. And let's see, next we'll go, all the recommendations are to concur. The first exhibit I'll go to is for the construction contingency fund authorizations. What this fund pays for basically is if there's costs are more than anticipated, and this gives the administration some money, during the fiscal year in case, essentially between now and June 1st of next year, when the new budget comes, so that they can spend money if the costs are a little higher. They put $5 million when none of it was scheduled this year. And part of the reason for that is we have a large program now with lots of very expensive projects, so it doesn't take that much for a project to be a little bit over. And so also in the bill, it mentions that there's a cap of 1.25% of the CDAC recommendation as the fund balance, and they're waiving that for this year because there's concerns. They want to make sure they have enough money in it. And let's see. The next program here is going to be facility maintenance. We've talked about quite a bit over the years. I mean, what this chart shows is how much the backlog has grown in recent years. And I think the reason for the growth since 2020 is not necessarily because there's that many more projects, but what's happened is there additional positions have been given to Department of General Services to improve their monitoring of these projects, and they have more engineers now that can go into the facility and check them out. And as a result, I think we're just finding more stuff. We always had the stuff. Now we actually know more about what we have. And then to the credit, the administration has been putting more money in the budget. Next exhibit here, this kind of shows you the priority classes. The priority 1 class, that's kind of big emergency, for example. I think that one is a Patuxent project where the fire alarm system isn't working and they want to get that up. Those if you're in class 1, you usually don't stay there very long because there's such an emergency. They're a high priority. Let's see. Now, this is you can see here, the total spending for this was supposed to be about $22 million, and they have $110 million. That's $35 million is in this budget as GO bonds, and then there's another $75 million in the dedicated purpose account, which I think you heard earlier today. So I won't not go into those details. Our concern that we have with this is the budget's 3 times as big as the high water mark of $35 million. So the question is, do they have the capacity to do that? And that'll be discussed more in the operating budget analysis. All right, let's see. I'll skip that. I'm going through this quickly because I know you've had a long day and there's plenty behind me. There is a State House restoration. That money has been moved up this year. It was not supposed to be any in the budget this year, but they've put $26 million instead, and also the costs have gone up a little bit as well. For Guilford Avenue is an interesting one, too. What's happened here is, that's, as with the other one, the pattern we've seen is that I suppose because we have a little bit more money, we're putting more money into these projects and doing some projects a little earlier than we had scheduled. Final thing I want to talk about is on the Goldstein building, and that's in the list. It's not getting funded this year, but it's in the 6-year CIP. The questions really we have with that is there's a lot of employees working in that building, and there's not a lot of free office space in the Indianapolis area. So how are you going to manage that renovation when it happens? Another question is then, can that be done in stages or not? So it seems there's a good chance it may not be able to be done in stages, and that would mean that you have to find even more space. So that is something administration should be thinking about. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank, for that great analysis. Any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, come on down. And Mr. Secretary, once you get to the table, please feel free to introduce your team and respond to the analysts' comments, and really appreciate you being here, Mr. Secretary. Please.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Zucker and members of the subcommittee. For the record, I'm Ellington Churchill, Secretary for the Maryland Department of General Services. Here with me today, to my right, your left, Nelson Reichert, Deputy Secretary for the Department. To my left, your right, Courtney League, Acting Assistant Secretary for Design, Construction, and Energy. On behalf of the dedicated and hardworking men and women of General Services, I want to thank you for another opportunity to talk to you about our capital budget. And it is also good to be back in person, seeing everyone in this setting. The department continues to have a robust business. In the current fiscal year, General Services has awarded over $60 million in new projects and $50 million in ongoing capital projects. And currently, we are forecasting 134 projects in design that equate to a construction value of $755 million. You have our written testimony, so I'm not going to read it. I would like to thank Mr. Frank, Patrick Frank, for his analysis in this year. He's been stellar each and every year. Mr. Frank has noted 8 recommendations for action, including PAYGO and GEO-bond funds, and the department concurs with all recommendations noted in the report. Mr. Chair, being sensitive to time, we stand ready to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for that concise testimony. Any questions from the committee? Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, or maybe Nelson, I've talked to him on quite a few occasions about Canal Place in Cumberland and the possibilities of turning some of those facilities over to other groups. I know the task force is not done, I don't think. I'm not involved in that, and it should have been done 2 or 3 years ago, which I know you put a lot of input into, and hopefully the person chairing it gets this thing wrapped up shortly. But it came up again, someone mentioned to me the other day about the possibilities of the state upgrading the train station, bringing it up to standards and whatever. It does need some work. I think you would agree to that. I don't know how much, but and either giving that to the county or selling it to them for a minimum price, which would take it off the state's hand and you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining anything. Are you still, at one time you told me you were willing to look at that. Are you still in that position?
Senator, we still would look at it at the possibility. We don't obviously have any funds to put into any work in the building, you know, scheduled, but I'd certainly be willing to talk with you or any funding from the county. You're right, the committee or the chair task force has not come up with a decision yet as to what they are going to recommend to go forward. So that could be part of the recommendation.
So if not we, but if the result is that the county would be interested, I mean, you look at this stuff every year, and if they're interested and you're interested, you can always put money in next year's budget after you see what needs to be done to
We'd be willing to
bring it
talk,
up to par, so to speak.
we'd be willing to talk with the county about it as a possibility, yes.
And I'm looking kind of down the road past their nose scenario, which that case it would get off your hands and you wouldn't have to worry about putting money in it to keep it up and running,
Right.
which in the long run would save you money.
See,
And you wouldn't have people yelling at you to fix the heater and air conditioning, right?
that's exactly right, yes. We were able to do that for you, though.
Well, it needed to be done because people were getting overheated or freezing, one or the other. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wirtz. Any other questions for the Secretary or his team? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee members, we're now going to turn to the capital budget of Morgan State University. I see my former chair out there, Senator Joan Cora Conway. Always great to have you back, Madam Chair. But with that, before we move to the university itself, we're going to hear from Ian Klein, and then we'll have the university's response. Mr. Klein, whenever you're ready.
All right, what you have before you is the capital analysis for Morgan State University. There are 5 projects for the university recommended for funding in the CIP, and these projects are found on the cover page. The first project that I am going to discuss involves, it starts on the bottom of page 3 and continues through the top of page 6 and concerns deferred maintenance and site improvements. Morgan has identified a backlog of roughly $200 million in deferred maintenance expenses, which this program is meant to address. And while there's no out-year funding included in the CIP, this is considered to be an annual program. Morgan utilizes a variety of methods to address deferred maintenance projects on campus, and one of which this year includes the utilization of higher education emergency relief funds. The President should comment on how the institution plans to utilize these funds to address deferred maintenance projects on campus. Exhibit 1 on page 5 documents a shift in how the program is funded in the 2022 CIP. In the 2022 CIP, the program receives $16 million more than the 2021 CIP, and this is the result of an acceleration of GO funds for deferred maintenance projects, budget capacity for deferred maintenance projects this year, changing university needs, and the administration's priority for facilities renewal projects. It also should be noted that $10 million in PAYGO funding for deferred maintenance projects is included in the dedicated purpose account, bringing the 2023 appropriation to $20 million. Morgan has several projects identified for funding this year, and one of which includes the Stadium Way Slope Stabilization Project, which includes repairs and stabilizing the foundation of a major roadway and the adjacent hillside. The second project includes the Carter Grant Wilson building renovation. As seen on Exhibit 2 on page 7, funding for this project has been accelerated so that the design can begin in fiscal 2023. Once completed, the building will house the School of Graduate Studies and the Division of International Affairs. The third project is for the new Science Center Phase 1 Washington Service Center demolition. The demolition of this building will provide the space needed to construct the new Science Center. Of note for this project, the construction completion month is September 2024, which is the same construction start month for the new Science Center. This project has already been delayed once, and should the project be delayed again, it would impact the anticipated start date of construction for the new Science Center. The fourth project in the CIP is for the new Science Center, Phase 2. $7 million is included in the 2022 CIP to begin design. This project has been an out-year project in the CIP for several years, and now the first tranche of funding is to be provided this year. The total cost of this project is expected to be $210 million, with substantial construction funding beginning in fiscal 2025. The new building will house the biology and chemistry departments and the Dean's Office of Computer, Mathematical, and Natural Sciences. The last project identified for funding is the new Health and Human Services Building, Phase 2. Funding is included in the CIP for construction and equipment. The current total cost of this project is $164.7 million, which is $6.9 million more than last year's CIP due to high construction inflation. And construction is estimated to be completed by March 2024. There are 3 projects identified in the out years, which are found on pages 9 and 10. These include campus expansion, the Lake Clifton High School demolition project, the demolition of the Jenkins Behavioral and Social Sciences Building, as well as a new project that's identified called campus renovations. This program would address projects that have surpassed the DBM definition of deferred maintenance but will reduce the overall backlog. The addition of this program will allow Morgan time to clearly identify the scale of projects and submit facility program reports that identify the need for the renovations. The recommended actions are found on pages 2 and 3, and DLS recommends approving all items listed under those actions. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klein. Any questions for the analyst? Question for Ms. Klein? Thank you very much. Mr. President, President Wilson, come on up, and any members of your team that you have with you, bring them on up. And it's good to see you again, and glad we were able to go out, I guess, 3 or 4 months ago to do a site visit at your university, and looks like things are going great. So glad you're doing great work, and please, if you could respond to the analyst's recommendations, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair Zucker and other members of the subcommittee. Very pleased to be able to come and say a few words about the university and to respond to the analysts' questions. We certainly thank our analyst, Ian Klein, for, once again, just a superb analysis. I do have with me several members of our administrative team at Morgan. To my immediate right is Mr. Sidney Evans, who is our Executive Vice President for Finance and Administration. Next to him, of course, is Senator Joan Carter Conway, who is Special Assistant to the President for State Relations. And to my left is Ms. Kim McCalla, who is in charge of all construction on the campus. And then right behind me is Dr. Don Terryville, who is our Vice President for State and Federal Relations. We certainly express our appreciation to this committee and to the legislature for the investments that have already been made in our capital facilities in Morgan. They have already paid handsome dividends for us. You can just walk the campus and look at the pride in which students now enter those facilities and know that they are being taught in world-class classrooms and conducting experiments in world-class laboratories. Indeed, it has had just a positive impact on our retention rates, on our graduation rates. We have increased our graduation rate by 65%. We are in the 11th year of retention rates above 70%. And investment in facilities matter. The students, when they leave the institution, they are excited to return, and that's what we really want. We also have been fortunate to have received some private investments in Morgan over the last year and a half. Of course, you read about some of those transformational gifts, and we say to the private sector, we too are open for investments, and so we always appreciate that. In terms of our next 10 years, are really intending just to grow on the last 10 years. And with that growth, of course, will mean additional investments in facilities. That is outlined in our written testimony to you. We certainly appreciate what is included in the governor's budget this year for Morgan, $87.5 million in GO bonds and $10 million in deferred maintenance for a total of about $97.5 million. That is much appreciated. I will say one thing before we get to the questioning, one additional thing. While we are certainly appreciative of the incredible investments that we are seeing coming our way, we have produced for this committee, Chair Zucker, and for the rest of our legislators, a report detailing $240 million in deferred maintenance. Morgan is one of the oldest public universities in the state, and as such, we have a number of legacy buildings, and those buildings, many of them are falling apart and are no longer useful in their current condition. And so we simply would ask this committee if there is any opportunity to consider an additional, what we may call substantial investment in us to enable us to expedite some of these renovation projects. We would really be appreciative of that, so we can move these offices, move individuals back into these offices and use these buildings in a much more effective way. And so with that, I will turn attention now to the issues that Mr. Klein has asked us to address. First, I'm going to ask Mr. Evans to address the issue on page 4, and then Ms. Kim McCalla will address all of the other issues. And before I turn it over to them, Ms. Kim McCalla, as I indicated, has been has overseen all of our new construction on the campus, as you know, for over the last 12 years or so. And during my tenure at Morgan, we have always brought those projects in on time and under budget. And so I know it pains her, it pains me, it pains Mr. Evans, it pains Senator Conaway, it pains Dr. We don't like to come back and ask for additional dollars. We know how to be effective stewards of those dollars, but we have no control over inflation. And so that's where we're headed. So with that, Mr. Evans and then Ms. McCallum.
Thank you, President Wilson, Chairman Zucker, and the members of the committee. I too want to echo President Wilson's comments about the great work that this committee does and the support that we receive from the state of Maryland. Page 4, the president should comment on how the institution plans to utilize funding from the various federal HERF packages to address deferred maintenance projects. We have provided a written response, and I will summarize that response. As you know, HERF funds have strict criteria, and Morgan is working very diligently to ensure that we meet the requirements of the HERF dollars. We use the bulk of these funds to pay for students, direct payments to students, lost revenue, safety, and health and safety of the university. The remaining HERF funds will be for infrastructure projects such as mechanical upgrades, indoor air quality upgrades, ceiling and panel renovations, and renovations over the summer to improve our legacy student housing facilities. The HERF funding complements our capital budget resources that you provide in the state of Maryland, and it is just one of the multiple resources we're using to address the over $200 million of deferred maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for having us here. And my role is easy this year, so I'm going to be respectful of your time. And Morgan is in agreement with all the recommendations that were stated in the document. We are excited about these venture, and we're looking forward to spending this money and making the state proud of what we're doing and continually be proud of what we're doing. And I'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vice Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, President. Mr. President, just always good to see you, Dr. Wilson, and thank you, Senator Conaway, and just the entire team. Let me be very clear. Inside of the document, it talked about Lake Clifton. It talked about, I guess, fiscal year 2023. We are on track for fiscal year 2024 and 2025, but not 2023. I just wanted to make clear that it sounds like April 2022, the MOU with the city would be signed in reference to that specific project, and that we are on track for 2024 and 2025 to the best of our ability.
And we thank you very much, Senator McCray, for your support of this effort on our part. We're looking forward to signing the MOU with the city. And of course, we are already in the middle of master planning that entire project. And the investment that you're already making in us is going to be the first step toward the initial build-out of the 50.09 acres that will come Morgan's way. This will be the largest acquisition of real property for Morgan since it moved to its current location in 1917.
Thank you, and thank you all for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair McCray. Any other questions? Not, Mr. President, thank you very much. Senator, good to see you. Good to see your whole team. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick thing. Thank you for the gracious introduction. But as Kim was talking about and Dr. Wilson was talking about the renovations, the deferred maintenance, I noticed one thing about deferred maintenance in terms of the state's plan. When you get to a certain point in deferred maintenance, it's no longer deferred maintenance, it's renovation. And until we change that point, it's problematic, especially for historically black colleges, because I think it's 7.5 million. If it's over 7.5 million, is when it goes to renovation. 2.5. Oh, 2.5. Somebody said it was at 7 now. Well, after 2.5 million, you can no longer do the deferred maintenance. Then you can continue, but you have to submit all these plans and analysis. And because it has been so long for these buildings, it just costs you more money in order to fix them because it's time consuming. So we're another year and a half trying to conduct the deferred maintenance. So, I don't know too much, but I think we probably need to raise the threshold for deferred maintenance, especially relevant to historically black institutions since we've been neglected for so long. Thank you.
thank you, Senator. Thank you for that. Thank you, Dr. Wilson and your whole team. I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Committee members, we're going to turn our attention now to the capital budget of Department of Environment, starting out first with the analyst, Andrew Gray. Mr. Gray, whenever you're ready to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll now talk about the Maryland Department of the Environment's capital program. Capital budget summaries on page 1 there, 10 programs, and you see the out-year funding noted. Getting right into the PAYGO recommended actions, DLS recommends concurring with all 5 recommendations there. And then for the GEO bond recommended actions, one diversion from concurring with everything is to modify language for the Conowingo Dam watershed project to strike the dredging component of that language. Then you see the other recommendations right here. In terms of the CIP, what you're seeing for fiscal 2023 is some general funds, which you don't typically see for matching funding for the capitalization of the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund and the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund. It's due to the state's fiscal situation, able to do that instead of using general obligation bond funding. Decrease due to, I think, mostly the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund, special funds that are revolving. Then you're seeing some increases in the out years, and then we'll be talking a little bit about the federal money that's coming in as well. In terms of the overall capital changes by program, lays out here the big picture. One of the big changes here is the Conowingo Dam watershed. We'll be talking more about that. In terms of just jumping into the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, really like to focus on a particular issue here that's come up in the context of the operating budget, but it's also relevant here as well. The Maryland Department of the Environment did have an audit, a workforce analysis was conducted by a third party contracted by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, determined that the water supply program is understaffed and underfunded. MDE has the ability to use some of the federal money that comes in for operating purposes. You see in Exhibit 3, they are able to use the 4% set aside for their Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund administration funding, but they're choosing not to do that for fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. Instead, they're opting to use all that money for capital projects. While laudable, there is a need there to address the shortcomings in the program. Therefore, DLS recommends that the agency comment on the implications of not using the project set-aside funding in fiscal 23 to help fund its water supply program, given the workload analysis reporting findings and recommendation. Then in terms of another program I'd like to highlight here, the Bay Restoration Fund. The funding is $78.1 million, so it's a $3 million increase relative to what was planned. But in terms of looking out for the program, it's really fully subscribed. It's now at the point where they're able to basically fund the minor wastewater treatment plants, and that's about it. Due to some of the constraints on the program, some of the uses of the funding, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what this does is it actually encourages the administration to then put in general obligation bond programs funding amounts in fiscal 26 and 27 as well. So that reflects the need to try to expand the program's ability to fund projects again, even though it has the constraints on it. In terms of another program I'd like to highlight here is the mining remediation program. It's receiving, actually, the situation occurs in Upper Georges Creek Shaft Stream Restoration Project in Allegheny County. They actually unencumbered quite a bit of money recently, relatively recently, and then are using that money for other purposes due to the project not moving forward. And just like to also highlight that they're potentially going to be the beneficiary of Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding as well for abandoned mine land reclamation, but it remains to be seen whether those projects will actually be funded by the federal funding or whether it will go through the operating budget for sort of chemicals for dosers and that sort of thing. In terms of the Conowingo Dam watershed is one of the big projects in the fiscal 23 allowance, $25 million in general obligation bonds that supports the Conowingo watershed implementation plan, which is basically the states getting together and trying to figure out how to address the nutrients and sediment behind the Conowingo Dam. There's $25 million is a substantial amount of stake for this, this purpose. It's an excellent first step by the state, really shows the state's committing to the watershed implementation plan, but we're not as clear about exactly what the details of how the funding is going to be used. There are some parameters in terms of how the funding is supposed to be used in terms of the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, that they're kind of financing authority, and as Senator Alford knows, being on the Chesapeake Bay Commission, that the idea there is the kind of cost-effective agricultural best management practices in the Susquehanna River watershed, sort of the ideal in terms of how that money is to be used. But we don't have clarity about exactly how the administration plans to use the funding. We've asked a number of questions here that the agency perhaps could then clarify exactly how that funding will be used. And then also recommends that language be struck from the fiscal 23 capital budget authorizing the funding to be used for dredging program, since that's not really an effective, cost-effective use of funding for Chesapeake Bay restoration purposes. In terms of the issues, the issue first one here is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding for the Maryland Department of the Environment. Substantial amount of money is coming in between federal fiscal 22 and federal fiscal 26. $880 million or so from the Maryland Department of the Environment through mostly its water quality and drinking water revolving loan funds. Substantial amount of money, a lot of work, good work is going to be done here, and will help out their programs in many ways in terms of perhaps the operating side and then also just expanding what can be done in Maryland, particularly for lead service line replacements. Department of Legislative Services recommends that MDE comment on the amount of discretion MDE is expected to have in terms of how that funding, that federal funding may be used, and how the funding may change MDE's implementation of its current programs and how MDE is preparing to use the funding effectively and equitably. The second issue here concerns the Bay Restoration Fund balance. We talked a little bit about the out-year use of general obligation bond funding to shore up the program. So this digs a little bit deeper into exactly what's going on with the Bay Restoration Fund. So there have been substantial balances we've noted in previous years. It no longer seems to be the case. In terms of the revenues, just briefly drop here to the Bay Restoration Fund revenue exhibit 5. Revenues have been around $115 million or so a year for the last couple of years, but then dropped to $98.1 million in fiscal 21. This is during the pandemic, so there are potentially pandemic reasons, and there are a couple laid out here. In terms of the timing of the payments, there was a delay. There was a tax alert that the controller issued that allowed for kind of delay in payments. There's also the possibility that some of this has to do with telework and school closure impacts, because we're all still at home, so we're all still paying for the Bay Restoration Fund fee at home, but the businesses are paying by use, equivalent kind of person use in the business. And if people aren't actually at the businesses using water, then you're not getting those payments. There's also the possibility that there are hardship exemptions that were granted that potentially could reduce the amount of revenues coming in. And then finally, MDE notes recently it did find some information from the Controller's Compliance Division indicating that the payments were not remitted, and that perhaps could explain what's going on. Now, if it is in fact the payments not being remitted, then that's an easy solution in terms of obviously going after the people who need to pay. If it's something else like the hardship exemption or even the idea that, it's where people are actually working, like, if they're teleworking more than they're not in businesses, and the businesses aren't paying for the water use, then they're not paying into the Bay Restoration Fund. So that would be a longer-term consideration and concern about the sustainability of the revenues. In terms of expenditures from the funds, so this is the flip side. Two major components of the funding that are obviously coming out of the fund, the Clean Water Commerce Act, $20 million in annual funding transferred to the Clean Water Commerce account. So that substantially reduces obviously the funding that can be used for the projects as originally slated. And the Trade Solutions Now Act provides for $15 million, in fiscal 23 only. So that also reduces the amount of flexibility and the kind of use of funding by the program. And DLS recommends that MD comment on the long-term sustainability of the Bay Restoration Fund, considering the impacts of partially explained revenue declines, recent legislation, and aggressive encumbrance schedules that are not necessarily being realized in the timeframes MD is pointing out. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Any questions for Mr. Gray? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, Secretary Grumbles, if you want to come up with your team. Welcome,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, I'm Ben Grumble, Secretary of the Environment. I'm joined by Horacio Tablada, Deputy Secretary and Problem Solver, Senator McCray, and also Jeff Fretwell, who heads up our Water Quality Finance Administration. Mr. Chairman, let the record reflect that I'm smiling behind this mask because this is such a strong budget. We live up to our commitments, clean water commerce legislation, urban tree solutions now, focusing on rural water and small water infrastructure needs, and embracing pollution prevention, including pollution prevention upstream. And $78 million Bay Restoration Fund to upgrade minor wastewater treatment plants. But overall, the capital budget is $326 million across 10 programs. That's part of the reason why I'm smiling, because we all know that investments in infrastructure translate into improvements environmentally and health-wise and economy-wise. And just last opening statement is that I'm also smiling because of the leadership in getting the bipartisan infrastructure law, the law of the land, and Governor Hogan in particular championing that effort. Our state is going to benefit significantly, and the Chesapeake Bay is going to benefit significantly. Western Maryland's going to benefit significantly for the mine remediation, abandoned mine program, and this is very important because of the PFAS challenge, where we're going to get significant funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law. I know Senator Elfreth is very engaged and familiar with the need for proactive efforts on that front, and lead-free drinking water, very important times for us. I'm going to turn to the, after Andrew's analysis, there were some specific comments I was asked to make and recommended actions. For the PAYGO recommended actions on page 2 of the analysis, we appreciate and we accept the DLS recommendation to concur with the allowance for the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund Program, the Hazardous Substance Cleanup Program, the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund Program, the Bay Restoration Fund Wastewater Program, and the Bay Restoration Fund Septic Systems Program. We must be doing something right, and we appreciate all the support from the legislature over the years, and particularly right now with the DLS analysis. For the GO bond recommended actions on page 2 and 3 of the analysis, we appreciate and we accept the recommended actions for the flood program, which I might add is a climate resiliency program. We're very proud of the fact that we restarted that program that had been moribund for years, and it's getting a lot of support, and it needs to, in the name of climate resiliency. But also the mining remediation program, the supplemental assistance program, and the water supply financial assistance program. We respectfully do not agree with the recommendation to strike the design and construct enhanced dredging program language related to the Conowingo Dam watershed program. Environmental dredging and beneficial reuse is integral to a holistic approach to pollution prevention, climate resiliency, and implementation of the multi-state Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan. Now, related to the drinking water loan program, We're asked to comment on the implications of not using the project set-aside funding in fiscal '23 to help fund the water supply program, a very important program which we have a plan to fill vacancies, and we are filling vacancies. The answer is that there is no negative implication of using the project set-aside funds in fiscal '23 for capital costs as we are, rather than operating costs. In fact, we can request up to double the set-aside funds in future grant applications if they're needed for operating expenses. We're also requested to discuss the Conowingo Dam Watershed Program. And as I mentioned earlier, we do not agree with the proposed language to strike the provisions related to the $6 million going to MES for environmental dredging and beneficial reuse. There are also several, I'm not going to go into every one, but there's quite a few questions I'm asked to comment on with respect to the Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan. I will hit the highlights and remind the members of the committee that we provided responses in writing to each of those important questions. Several years ago, the states and the EPA all agreed that the Conowingo problem, it's not just the owner of the dam, it's all the upstream pollution from New York and particularly Pennsylvania and to some degree Maryland, and that we really need to solve that problem to prevent 6 million pounds of nitrogen and then also the sediment and phosphorus pollution from flooding into the lower Susquehanna and the Chesapeake. So we really pushed for a multi-state innovative approach that also included support from the federal government to develop a watershed implementation plan for the Susquehanna River watershed. We, over the last year and a half, came up with an innovative approach that would use the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, which has Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, and the federal government as members, to serve, as Andrew Gray said, as a finance agency to oversee projects, BMPs, for a truly multi-state interjurisdictional approach to that upstream pollution prevention need. The Susquehanna River Basin Commission can enter into contracts. They can receive and distribute funds. They are an important player in this, and I'm really encouraged between EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, Susquehanna River Basin Commission, and the states, particularly Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York. We're going to get this an innovative program running, and it's going to contribute mightily to pollution prevention upstream. I was asked to comment on the natural filtration practices and where will they be invested in. The focus is on most effective basins. Where do we get the most bang for our buck and have the greatest impact on water quality as identified in the Watershed Implementation Plan. Maryland agencies have been very clear. We want this funding to be more specifically targeted to the natural filters such as forests and grass buffers, because they also provide climate resiliency. Also, there are agricultural practices such as nutrient management and soil conservation plans that can also help with ocean acidification concerns that we have and that are growing, and to protect drinking water supplies upstream. I was asked to comment on mussels. Why funding for freshwater mussels? Well, like oysters in the bay, they are an amazing cleaning machine and a natural filter in freshwater systems. In our settlement with Exelon, we required Exelon to put significant funding into a mussel hatchery and to support the overall ecosystem health of the Susquehanna River Basin. And there are other organizations, including the Potomac Riverkeeper Network, that are really focusing in on mussels as one of the key new tools, natural nature-based solutions. And so that's the reason why we are including that as one of the practices and key efforts of the partnership for the Watershed Implementation Plan for the Conowingo. I was also asked to comment on the $25 million that the governor's budget includes. We have endured a lot of talk over the years. We developed a very strong plan. States have been hesitant. The federal government has been hesitant. Some states have already put in $2 million, but the governor's budget recognizes that time is short. We have the 2025 restoration plan goal for the which we view as a real requirement under the TMDL. So we really wanted to jumpstart the effort. We're encouraged by what's happening since we put that in the budget, the governor's budget, $25 million. I know other jurisdictions, the Susquehanna River Basin Commission is going to be putting some funding in. We're in discussions with other states and with the federal government. I'm almost finished. I apologize for the length of the presentation. We also believe that consistent with the spirit of the Conservation Finance Act, which is moving through the General Assembly, this Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan will also help leverage private sector financing to support, through pay for performance and conservation practices, increased water quality benefits. We're also asked to discuss two issues, the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act funding, and the Bay Restoration Fund sustainability. For the federal law, specifically, how much discretion will Maryland have? That is, I thank Andrew Gray for flagging that for all of you. We know there's a tremendous amount of funding, $144 million for water and wastewater, $53 million for lead service line replacements. There's a lot of funding coming to Maryland, $238 million for the Chesapeake Bay program. A good portion of that will be in Maryland. For us, the key is going to be how much flexibility do we have. We've been reaching out to EPA and other federal agencies to say, let's accelerate the delivery of the funding. Let's work together to minimize the red tape. For instance, on lead service line replacement, we are urging the federal government to allow states, including Maryland, to use that funding not just for lead service lines, but for pipes and fixtures wherever they are. We're particularly looking at schools and other public buildings. We think that's going to be a big boost for preventing lead poisoning and also advancing environmental justice. Another important component of the funding is for these, some people call them the forever chemicals, but the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS substances, and emerging contaminants. And we are working on that front. We've urged EPA to be flexible to allow us to use those funds, not just for drinking water systems that are going to need funding for remediation as the standards get tighter and tighter, and our ability to detect in the parts per trillion these chemicals it's going to lead to more costs, but also to make sure that we have funding flexibility for fish tissue and more testing throughout the ecosystem in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But we'll be engaged with communities as well as with other federal agencies, and including our military installations on implementation of that important funding. We were asked to comment on the long-term sustainability of the Bay Restoration Fund. So legislation was enacted in the session last year that allows for cost-effective E&R upgrades to minor wastewater treatment plants as a first priority for Bay Restoration funding, with reduced Bay Restoration funding available for the other uses of the wastewater account. So we really are focusing on the, pursuant to law, on the upgrades to the smaller wastewater treatment plants. We're also proud of in honoring the commitment to the Tree Solutions Now Act and the Clean Water Commerce Act. That does have an impact on the overall availability of Bay Restoration Fund dollars, but that's why one of the reasons why we've been championing the Conservation Finance Act and also wise use of the large amount of federal funding that's coming in through the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're continuing to work with local governments to get those funds encumbered and committed as quickly as possible for projects included in the capital budget. And Mr. Chairman, the last thing I just wanted to say is that we are embracing not just the federal funding and the continued management of our state programs, but on new innovative approaches like the Conservation Finance Act, which is working its way through the Senate and the House. And we support that because we think it's going to help provide environmental infrastructure to deliver co-benefits for water quality and for climate action, carbon sequestration. Mr. Chairman, I'm mercifully concluding my long testimony. I appreciate your patience. Happy to respond to any questions or concerns that you might have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and we appreciate your time in going through the response to the analysts' questions. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a couple questions. I'm going to try to condense them. And first, let me just start by thanking you and the governor for that first initial $25 million. It was as you know, it was who was going to jump in first and who was going to be a leader, and we appreciate that Maryland was that. Has there been any discussions with Pennsylvania on a similar investment? I know they're working through their budget as we are now, but I support this, but I hope this isn't the right incentive for them to move in tandem as well.
There have been discussions,
Okay.
and I'm hopeful that other states will step up too. But that's about all I can say right now. There are
Okay.
discussions. We're making it very clear, both to EPA leadership and to all the states and to others, that we don't want this to be a solitary effort. We really need other states to step up.
And I know EPA appreciates it as well, so thank you. And then there's no funding for this in the out years. So what was that on the table when you were negotiating this budget?
Well, we actually agree, we realize that there's not funding in the out table, but in the out years. However, we do recognize that there's going to be additional revenues coming in, and we do want to see how the program could get launched, and in conjunction with the Conservation Finance Act. I'm optimistic that in the out years there will be funding.
Okay.
We viewed this as Maryland would be the true leader to jumpstart the program. That doesn't mean we're going to be committing $25 million every year. The plan, which was detailed and a lot of time and effort was spent on it, thanks to the University of Maryland for helping to develop the plan. But they were estimating $53 million a year to get this innovative approach going. So we have no expectation that we're going to be putting up $25 million every year in the out years.
Okay. Okay. And I do have questions on the dredging, but that's perhaps best for MES.
They're in charge of the dredging.
Okay.
We have been overseeing it, the dredging, and I always want to accompany with the dredging. It's environmental. It's dredging for environmental purposes. That includes climate resiliency, but the components are dredging and beneficial reuse. It's how we get those clean sediments out of the river and out of the bay and put to better use.
Agreed. I guess my two questions are, there's still an outstanding study as to the benefits of that dredge material. Do we plan on having that study ready before we spend the $6 million, or what's the status of that study?
I think you should ask MES about that. I will say there are a lot of studies. There's a tremendous amount of national support. The new Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, who was confirmed by the U.S. Senate, has been touting the beneficial reuse of sediments and dredge material. I think for us, it's a key of what markets can we create and how do we reduce the costs of transporting those clean sediments to sites, whether it's mid-bay or Poplar Island type sites, but sites to shore up the land. So that, I think MES would have more insights on the study, but we're very supportive and making sure that innovative and beneficial reuses of the sediment are put to work.
Okay. Mr. Chair, one more. Thank you. Similar question. Dredging is not yet, to my understanding, recognized by EPA as a BMP. That's a lot of acronyms. I apologize for the public watching at home.
It should be. It should be, and we are pursuing studies and models, and the scientific community. There's a lot of good new material and information on how valuable clean sediment is.
Okay.
And so my expectation is that we will be moving to have a recognized BMP for environmental dredging. I don't know how soon,
Okay,
but that's an important component, and you're correct.
agreed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Eckert.
Very much. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for your continued focus on the Conowingo. Having grown up above the Conowingo, and now I live way below the Conowingo, I get to see it from both perspectives. So when I first came to the legislature, the Susquehanna River Basin Authority was asking us to step up to the plate back then. And we were limited because of the revenues, and we weren't able to do that. So this has been a long struggle, and I just really appreciate your push on it because it does make a difference to the overall health of the bay. My question has to do with the Bay Restoration Funds. Did you say, and am I to understand that we will have perhaps another infusion from the federal level that will help with the upgrades of our small systems? Or is that not so?
That's going to be helpful to us to carry out projects that might not have been funded through the Bay Restoration Fund because of the economy or the pandemic, and because of our focus on the urban tree solutions and clean water commerce and on the minor ENR projects. But Jeff, you want to correct or add anything to that?
I mean, I don't really, Jeff Fretwell, Maryland Department of Environment, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, the Secretary is correct that the additional funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law will help us be able to fund additional projects above and beyond what we normally will be able to fund and supplement the Bay Restoration Fund dollars that we have.
Thank you. Well, you know my wish. I'd like to make sure our low-lying areas get upgraded before we get inundated with more water with sea level rise. So thank you for that initiative, and I'll talk with you offline about the specifics. But thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I don't see any other questions. I will now move on to the Maryland Environmental Service. Andrew Gray, you're back again. And just to remind the committee, we have two more after this. So, Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll now present the Maryland Environmental Service capital budget. You see on page 1 there are two components of the budget at this stage of the presentation: the State Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund. It's around $26 million, and the Conowingo Dam dredging project was just discussed, is $6 million. In terms of the PEGO recommended actions, there is also funding in the Board of Public Works, or actually the Department of General Services budget, for the Eastern Correctional Institution cogeneration plant for a fuel conversion project, and DLS is recommending concurring with that deficiency. And in terms of the GEO bond recommended actions, DLS is recommending the deletion of the Conowingo Dam dredging funding due to the concerns raised about the report not being available yet. They're going to talk about the beneficial reuse, and therefore the funding is not necessary at this time. Then recommending approval for this funding for the State Sewer and Water Infrastructure Improvement Fund, and then also the approval of pre-authorizations for fiscal 2024. In terms of the overview here, 3 components of the analysis we'll be talking about: the Eastern Correctional Institution cogeneration plant fuel conversion, once again, the State Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund that has $17.3 million in general obligation bonds and $8.6 million in non-budgeted funds from the Natural Resources Development Fund. And there are about 7 projects in each of those portfolios. Then there's the $6 million for Conowingo. All right, jumping into deficiency, $7.3 million. The original plan for the Eastern Correctional Institution cogeneration facility was to convert it from the use of wood-burning chips to natural gas. The idea was to connect with a trunk line of natural gas coming down the Eastern Shore that would be going to the Maryland to the Eastern Correctional Institution and also University of Maryland Eastern Shore. One of the components of the project was to upgrade the facility, the cogeneration plant, and then just to separate from the idea of converting it to natural gas. And the separate project then was to convert it to natural gas. Well, that project has become a little bit more expensive than originally anticipated. It's blossomed from around $14.2 million project to a $16.1 million project, necessitating a fiscal 22 deficiency for Maryland Environmental Service in order to be able to continue work on this. The agency notes that the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the labor issues and cost increases due to supplies, materials are the reasons for these increases. However, it doesn't seem sufficient to really kind of get a full understanding about why a project would expand in cost this much. Therefore, DLS recommends that MES describe in detail how the costs increased from $4.2 million to $16 million. And then DLS also then recommends approving that funding in order to complete, or at least get further along in that project. The State Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund is the next thing we'll be talking about here. This is kind of the CIP comparison looking at it. You see in fiscal 23, there's $17.3 million GO bonds for the state part of it for the non-DNR projects, and there's $8.6 million in special funds for the DNR projects. I am going to skip directly to the Camp Frederick project, which is one of the state projects. Just $7.7 million for new planning and construction funding. This project's really moving quickly. $800,000 in federal funds from the military department allowed for some design of the improvements, and they're already ready to get going in terms of design and getting into construction as well. And pre-authorization of $3.5 million for fiscal 24. Really, the fire is under them because the facility there is expanding to include a new Marine Corps Readiness Center, and they need to be ready for that by fiscal 24. All right, Conowingo Dam dredging, talked a little bit about that, $6 million in general obligation bonds, large-scale dredging and beneficial reuse project. So Maryland Environmental Service has some history with this. It's done a certain amount of work. It's approximately $4.1 million overall for a sediment characterization study to find out what's in the dam, the sediment there, and look at kind of pilot dredging and then kind of how this can be used. Now, the study that will kind of inform us about how how we can move forward won't be ready until summer 2022. Therefore, it kind of leads to one of the recommendations regarding this project. But I'd also like to note briefly that this has been studied extensively. Back in March 2016, the Lower Susquehanna River Watershed Assessment Maryland and Pennsylvania report looked at a number of different options in terms of beneficial reuse, all different kinds of ways of looking at it, and really found a lot of cost prohibitive ways of doing things and not kind of great ways to kind of move forward. The MES actually notes that in doing its own work, that has found that environmental and recreation time of year restrictions make costs even higher, and there are additional project requirements from Exelon and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which appear to make this project even more difficult. Therefore, DLS recommends that MES comment on whether the project is ready for funding due to the fact that the study report would not be complete until summer 2022, and whether any other states have committed to Conowingo Dam dredging. For instance, is Maryland the only one? We're going to be going in there and not having anybody else follow. DLS also recommends, based on the fact that the report's not ready, the deletion of funding. And just one little note here, that the increase in the permit violations by local and corporate facilities that are managed by the Maryland Environmental Service reflects some new projects that they've brought online, then also one plant that apparently has a lot of violations when the seasons change. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much for that analysis. Any questions for Mr. Gray? All right, thank you very much. Dr. Charles Glass, if you want to come on up, and you and your team, and I think I hope you heard Senator Elfritt's line of questioning, so if you want to add anything during your testimony to that, please feel free to add.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Zucker and Vice Chair McCray and members of the committee. It's great to finally be here in person with you after 19 months on the job. For the record, my name is Dr. Charles Glass, and I'm Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Service. I have with me today Ms. Ellen Ferketic, Deputy Director, Mr. Hamid Patel, Managing Director of Finance, and Mr. Jeff Tosi, Director of Governmental Affairs. I would like to start by thanking Andrew Gray and the entire DLS team for their thoroughness and professionalism. It is really a pleasure to work with them throughout the year on all of these matters. You have our written testimony, so I will keep my remarks brief, as briefly as possible, given their severity, their seriousness. There were two items that DLS requested we respond to. First, Mr. Gray stated, DLS requested that we comment on whether the project is ready for funding if the sediment characterization study and pilot dredging project final report will not be completed until summer of 2022. Whether any other states have made a funding commitment to Conowingo Dam dredging. And finally, DLS is recommending deletion of the $6 million general obligation bond. We respectfully disagree with this assessment. On the first point, we expect to have a final report late spring 2022, not summer 2022. We've already received some draft information, and we've already received several different steps along this process. With respect to the $6 million GO bond request, this funding is entirely necessary for this project to continue. I'd like to just remind everyone on large engineering projects, construction projects, they start with alternatives designs, and it takes a lot of time with permitting and a lot of pre-planning and steps to get through in order to just be ready to actually perform any work in the environment. MES's mission is to provide operational and technical services to protect and enhance the environment for the benefit of the people of Maryland. We have started to gain some momentum on finally solving a decades-old problem. With no other funding identified, to my knowledge, this funding is critical for continuing the work. The Conowingo Dam is one of MES's shining examples of our organization's mission, and I truly hope that this project does not get short-circuited at this critical juncture. As Mr. Gray mentioned, DLS requested that we describe in details how the project cost has increased from $4.226 million to $16.072 million for the ECI natural gas conversion project. We provided a rather lengthy and detailed written response to the request, but I will summarize. The bulk of the cost overrun is found in the actual conversion of the 2 cogen boilers. The engineer's estimate was completed in 2019, before COVID-19 and before anything was competitively bid. We advertised the conversion work in August 2021 and received only a single bid of $10.2 million in November of 2021. We immediately re-advertised and received 2 bids, the low bid being $9.9 million. The same company, WM Schlosser, was the original and the winning bidder the second time around. The remainder of the cost overrun can be attributed to code compliance related to equipment changes, contingent measures for continued operations, extended need for temporary boiler power, complex integration of controls with the balance of the plant, and the extent of selective demolition inside the facility. With respect to DLS's recommendation for approval of the FY22 $7,284,815 general fund deficiency appropriation in the DGS statewide capital appropriation to fund the fuel conversion project at ECI, we concur with this recommendation and thank DLS for this recommendation. That concludes my testimony, with the exception of describing the need for the Conowingo work and the question of whether it's a certified BMP. Although when you dredge something and you bring up the sediment, as we see in the Baltimore Harbor every day we do it, wherever we're doing it and bringing it to the dredge material facilities, that is solids material. It does have nutrients in it, and I don't think there's really a question. The process of developing a BMP, a certified best management practice, in the Bay watershed is a scientific review that goes through a process. We'll be supporting that process all along. For my experience and from what everyone can see when they see the sediment, it's really questionable how anyone could think that there weren't solids in that material, that would be helpful in protecting the bay as the Conowingo Dam has reached capacity. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks.
Well, thank you very much for that thorough response. Any questions from the committee? Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Glass. I'm not a scientist. I have been to the Conowingo. My understanding is that it is basically the consistency of pudding, and there's very little solid behind that dam at this point. I guess my question is, while we are waiting the results of the study that's due in the summertime, do we have any appreciation for just how far this $6 million will go in addressing the significant deposit of sediment behind the dam?
So, as Secretary Grumbles mentioned, our original submission was in the tune of $50 million. to actually have a robust, actual physical process going on. This $6 million is for engineering, design, and planning
Okay.
to scale up from the 1,000 cubic yard pilot that we completed.
Okay.
There is a limited time, but there are lots of different methods for dredging, including hydraulic dredging, that if we had the right staging area and if we had the right amount of time, that every 3 months a year, we could dredge to our heart's content and then treat the material for the rest of the 9 months. If you look at our harbor dredge material management facilities, we dredge for the winter months, and then we dry, and we treat, and we evaluate innovative reuse and beneficial use processes throughout the rest of the time. So in looking at it, we're really talking about doing the design and engineering to scale up with the information we already have and that we will be receiving shortly.
Okay. And would it be, well, the $6 million, let's call it a technical study as we're looking into it, will that tell us how much the entire cost of dredging will be over time? Do we have an estimation of that?
The $6 million would go to actually scoping out all of the permitting,
Okay.
all right, all of the design of how we would actually go about the process. We will have alternatives for innovative reuse out of the current study.
Okay.
And this money would be used to plan for a larger phase. It is not going to, if you see the numbers, $4 million costs over all of those years. And we're really proud of the last year and a half of getting this over the line. It is very complicated with both Exelon and FERC. So it's not the normal layers of permitting that are with Baltimore Harbor, for instance. There's more to it than, so it's complicated. But this is all about that beginning engineering for a full-scale facility.
Understood. 2 quick questions more. Is the study in line to be delivered by the summer? Is that on schedule?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then do you foresee actually dredging in fiscal year '23?
Most of the time, when capital projects are awarded, they're not expected to deliver in the same year. Usually, there's a time frame for capital projects to be delivered. The $6 million would not cover actually doing a full-scale dredging, as I described earlier. So, no, there's no intent for us to. There are projects, I participated in a previous life in MDOT, where you do all of the planning for a new Susquehanna Bridge, and then once that planning is done and $100 million is spent on it for design and engineering, the book actually goes on a shelf. We're not talking about that, but we're also not talking about executing the project in one fiscal year.
Yeah, permitting is probably going to take a year and a half at least.
And being on, this is the Capital Budget Subcommittee, I know we appreciate that. I guess my question is more, have we broken it down by planning and design versus actual construction? In this case, construction being dredging.
It's broken it down to
Between the two, I think we're saying the same thing, Mr. Chair. I appreciate, but you do not anticipate actual dredging to occur in fiscal year '23?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Just for an observation for folks, if you see committee members coming in and out, we still have bill hearings, so that's where we are. Now we'll move on to Maryland Independent College and Universities. We'll start off with Morgan Smith. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in front of you, you have the capital budget analysis for the Maryland Independent College and University Association. And in the summary here, you'll see that in 2023, the request is for $14.65 million. And that is broken up between 3 MICUA projects for 3 colleges and then deferred maintenance among all 13 institutions. Here in Exhibit 1, you'll see a breakdown of all of the funding that the legislature has provided MICUA universities over the last several decades since 1997. And you'll see that the Johns Hopkins University has received the most at $48 million. And this, I believe, covers $206.5 million over the 13 institutions over this time frame. I'm just going to briefly go over each of the colleges and their projects. So the first is Hood College. They're asking for a $5 million grant to renovate the Hodson Science and Technology Center. So this is a current building, but it has inadequate space for classrooms and other instructional spaces like laboratories. And because of that, the growth of the STEM program at Hood College is hampered. You'll see that they want to renovate 25,000 net square feet, and hopefully that will address both the deficits in the classroom and in the laboratory spaces. This amount of money will also support the School of Health Sciences, and in doing that, they're hoping to house nursing, public health, among other programs in this building. This $5 million is only a quarter of the estimated $20.3 million for the total project cost. And you'll see that there's a note here about the time frame. So right now they expect design to conclude in October, and then as early as 2023 they expect construction to begin. The McDaniel College projects it's actually broken into 3 projects, and this is $1.3 million in grant money just for McDaniel, and that covers the Harvey Stone Pavilion, the McDaniel Environmental Center, and then an on-campus greenhouse. So the first project, the Harvey Stone Pavilion, is an existing pavilion on campus that needs a little bit of TLC. It needs a new roof, some paving, and just general landscaping around the pavilion. The college is hoping to use this space as a covered area for outdoor classrooms and just improve the structure for extracurricular purposes. It is close to some sports fields, and it seemed like students would convene and hang out in that space. So that is the first project. The second project is the McDaniel Environmental Center. This, again, is a freestanding building that already exists, but right now it is set up as a residential space rather than classroom space. And the college would like to use this, renovate it to classroom space for students who can come in and receive instruction in this building, and that's primarily to support environmental studies programs, among others. And finally, the on-campus greenhouse renovation. There is a greenhouse on McDaniel's College grounds, but it is very small. We did a site tour and couldn't get that many people into this space. So moving forward, McDaniel is hoping to use part of the $1.3 million grant to expand this space slightly. What they would do is improve the standing and countertop workspace to try to allow for more students to get into that tight space with instructional staff. And that would support several programs, environmental and food studies, among others. You'll see here the Stevenson University project. That is $5 million to support a 851 net square foot building for performing arts. So currently Stevenson does have a black box theater, but it is very small and it is on a different campus than where most of the students currently reside. And so this would bring that facility to the students, and it would expand the ability of the theater and media performance program to hold shows and to invite the community into this building. The hope, I think, is to allow off-site campus groups to host performances and other things in this building, as well as support the TMP program. And in addition, this building would not only house the theater, although that is the most important part, it would additionally provide administrative space. It would house a scene shop, which I believe right now they have one and it's too small, and then student classrooms so that the theater and media production program can be in one space. This proposed $5 million grant is only 39% of the total cost at $12.7 million. And most of these costs are preliminary because we don't believe that design is going to start until August. So just keep that in mind. And then the last item is the deferred maintenance. So as I said before, this deferred maintenance would cover all 13 institutions that MICUA oversees, and it's $3.352 million. This is intended as a one-time grant for these different institutions, and they would use them for a variety of things. Some schools need a new roof or doors or windows, while others might need to update energy efficiency or improve their fire safety systems. So that's something to look at. But I will note that this $3.352 million is going towards a $380 million backlog at these universities. We do recommend deleting this $3.352 million grant for facilities renewal projects at MICUA, primarily because we believe that state resources should be directed at addressing the $1 billion in deferred maintenance and facility renewal projects at state facilities and in the University of System Maryland campuses. Other than that recommendation, on page 2, you'll see that DLS recommends approving all of the other GO bond authorizations that total $11.3 million. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm willing to take any questions that you have.
Well, thank you very much for that analysis. Any questions from Ms. Smith? All right, thank you very much. Well, now, Ms. Fidler, if you want to come up with your great team. And it looks like there's a number of colleges represented: Hood, McDaniel, Stevenson. So, Ms. Fidler, I'll kind of leave it in your hands. Does that work?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
And start in any order you wish.
Great. So, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Fidler. I'm from the Maryland Independent College and University Association, and we are so appreciative for the state support that you all provide. And in particular, we're grateful to be included in the capital budget again this year. We have two priorities. One is our fiscal 2023 capital projects, which Morgan just described very well, and we're going to give you some more information about in a few minutes, and also the deferred maintenance funding. So our three fiscal 2023 capital projects are located at Hood College in Frederick, at Stevenson University in Owings Mills, and at McDaniel College in Westminster. And these projects, again, as Morgan said, are in the budget for $11.3 million. We are asking that you raise this by $2 million to be $13.3 million. Just as everyone else, we've struggled with skyrocketing materials costs, labor industry challenges, and also supply chain interruption. And in addition to benefiting students and advancing the state's plan for post-secondary education, we will be able to leverage $24 million in external resources with these projects, as well as creating 250 construction jobs for the state. Our second priority is for the deferred maintenance funding. As, again, Morgan noted, the capital budget includes $3.4 million for this purpose. We are asking that the committee and the legislature increase this to be $13 million, which would be dispersed evenly among our institutions as $1 million per institution, and we're asking that you reject the DLS recommendation. This first-time funding would be used to address accessibility issues for individuals with disabilities, energy efficiency and sustainability projects such as windows, doors, roofs, and also code life safety issues. So we collected information from our schools in the form of an inventory of these types of needs on campus, and attached to my testimony, I've included a sample of that inventory. I note for you that this $13 million that we're requesting is just over 3% of what we identified as our need. Also attached to my testimony, I have an explanation from each of our institutions about just how impactful this $1 million in deferred maintenance funding would be. So I know that it's long, but if you have a chance to read it, we would appreciate it. Our campuses are old, and while we are proud of the history and tradition that this represents, this means that our buildings are also old. We also find that donors aren't really interested in having an HVAC system or a boiler named after them. And you have been so generous with support to our institutions for academic facilities, but this doesn't help us with plumbing issues, for instance, in a residence hall, as one of my presidents has been saying lately, water should come out of the faucet, not out of the ceiling. So any help that you can give us would be so greatly appreciated. Our partnership with you goes back almost 250 years. And I've got to tell you, the nonprofit institutions in Maryland thrive in a way that they don't thrive in other states, and that's due in large part to your support. So, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'd like to let my panelists speak, and I think Rosa's going to start and talk a little bit about McDaniel.
Good afternoon. My name is Rosa Rivera-Hainay. I am the provost at McDaniel College. McDaniel College is grateful for the Maryland General Assembly's continuous support of the MEQA Capital Grant Program and the recognition of the vital role Maryland's independent colleges and universities play in educating the next generation of change agents in the state. With the endorsement of MEQA, McDaniel seeks a $1.3 million state capital grant for fiscal year 2023 in support of a $2.7 million project to renovate and expand 3 experiential learning facilities on campus. These improved spaces that total over 7,500 square feet will support our academic programs, research capabilities, and community outreach. The environmental studies programs is a growing area of academic interest on the Hill, with 73% increase in applicants over the last 5 years. Hands-on research and fieldwork are cornerstones of the program, providing experiential learning opportunities that give students an advantage over others as they enter the workforce. As mentioned, the proposed project has 3 parts. We have the Environmental Center, the McDaniel Environmental Center, which is a hallmark of our environmental studies program, and its expansion will bring new opportunities to our students, including a commercial teaching kitchen for our agri-food systems, a microscopy classroom, a green roof, and a seminar space. The second part of the project is the Harvey Stone Pavilion renovation, which is located right on campus, and its expansion into an outdoor teaching space that will impact both experiential learning and the community at large. Last but not least is the college's greenhouse, that its expansion will provide an accessible academic space with virtual classroom capabilities that can be used by both faculty and students for research, experiential learning, and campus and community service projects. We appreciate your consideration of this $1.3 million MEQA capital grant request to renovate and expand these facilities at McDaniel College. This will improve learning opportunities, resulting in increased volumes of higher quality research at our institution. And I thank you again for your continued efforts and support of McDaniel and all of Maryland's independent colleges and universities.
Hello, my name is Charles Mann. I'm the Vice President for Finance and Treasurer at Hood College. And on behalf of Hood College, we too would like to thank you for recognizing that capital support for the state's independent colleges and universities is a wise investment that benefits all of Maryland. We appreciate the General Assembly's steadfast support of the MEQA Capital Grant Program. Hood College, with the endorsement of MEQA, is seeking an increase of our $5 million request to $6 million for a state capital grant in fiscal year 2023 in support of an estimated $20.3 million renovation and expansion of the Hodson Science and Technology Center. This requested grant will be supplemented by fundraising and institutional funds. Initially constructed in 1957, with an addition built in 2001, or 21 years ago, the Hodson Science and Technology Center is a 3-story structure that houses the biology, chemistry and physics, computer science and information technology, and mathematics departments. Growth of these programs is being hampered, though, by an aging building that lacks sufficient instructional spaces and has deteriorating infrastructure systems. The college is also establishing a School of Behavioral Health Sciences. The demand of these science programs will increase and further expand the need for additional spaces. I need to state that the School of Behavioral Health Sciences will not be housed in this building. We could not fit it into the building. We are instead partnering with Frederick Health Hospital to rent space where the School of Behavioral Health Sciences will be. However, those students will be having to take significant amount of science classes, such as biology and chemistry, that will be in the Hodgson Science Building. The project will also include an addition to the building, which will house a new biomedical research and training center, a program that capitalizes on Hood's partnerships with local biotech firms. The renovation will allow Hood to continue its growth in the much-needed STEM programs. Approximately 73% of our undergraduate students and 81% of our graduate students are Maryland residents. A vast majority of these highly qualified students will remain in Maryland and join the workforce. Thank you again for your continued support.
Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Edmondson. I'm the CFO of Stevenson University, and I as well thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about this very important project for the university. As Morgan noted, it is a construction of a new building with a black box theater, scene shop, offices, and teaching space for the students. I will give you a size orientation. Our black box theater, which Morgan noted, is about 6 miles away from our main campus and is about a quarter of a size of the room that we're in today, so quite small. This project will enhance and support the theater department as well as serve a broader purpose for the campus and the surrounding community. We continue to consolidate the traditional undergraduate programs onto our Owings Mills campus, and at this time we don't have the appropriate gathering spaces for our student cultural groups, diversity and inclusion programming, academic presentations, and other student activities. The theater will provide this central gathering space for the Stevenson community. The opportunities for collaboration with the Jewish Community Center, Genesee, Irvine, Garrison Forest School, and St. Thomas, who all surround our Owings Mills campus, will benefit the community as a whole. Without your support and the state capital grant, private institutions such as Stevenson would not have the ability to support such projects. Thank you for your consideration in this funding today for the Black Box Theater, and I welcome any questions the committee may have.
Well, thank you very much. I was just looking at your capital projects right now, studying it, so I really appreciate you all coming out and giving your testimony. Any questions from the committee? All right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Fidler. Thank you, everyone, for coming down. Committee will now turn our attention to the Baltimore City Community College. Kelly Norton. And good to see you. Start whenever you're ready.
Forgive me, it's probably staring me in my face, but I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. Do you have it, we have it in front of us. I don't know if you have the paper in front of you that you can walk through it, or?
No, but I do have a flash drive.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay. Okay, this year's capital improvement program has 4 projects. 2 projects received funding in fiscal '23. $9 million for the deferred maintenance program, and $2,186,000 for the Learning Commons renovation and addition project. This includes $6,186,000 in general obligation bonds and $5 million in PAYGO general funds. DLS recommends approving the 3 items in the fiscal allowance. The Learning Commons renovation and addition is an expansion of the existing Bard Library on the main campus. It will function as the core common space on the campus where students can prepare for classes, work on assignments, and access electronic media. This year's fiscal allowance will fund the design of this project. This project has been accelerated from fiscal 2024 to fiscal 2023. The CIP includes $2,186,000 in fiscal 23 for the design phase. The total cost of the project is $34.5 million. The second project is the deferred maintenance program, which deals with Baltimore City Community College's extensive backlog of maintenance projects. Fiscal 2023 includes $4 million in general obligation funds and an additional $5 million in general funds budgeted in the dedicated purpose account. BCCC will have 5 years to spend the amounts budgeted in the DPA. Any unspent balance will revert to the rainy day fund. BCCC has provided a list of 35 shovel-ready projects. Exhibit 1 shows the largest share consists of window replacements, followed by replacing and improving restrooms. There are 2 out-of-year projects, the facilities building and the nursing building renovation addition. The facilities building is a new addition to the CIP. It will replace the temporary modular facility currently housing the facilities department with a new 12,210 gross square foot building. The design phase is expected to begin in fiscal 2027 with $370,000 program. The total cost is estimated at $6.2 million. The nursing building renovation, in addition, was in last year's CIP. The design phase for this project has been accelerated from 2026 to fiscal 25. $2.4 million has been programmed for the design phase, and the total cost is estimated at $40.1 million. Have an update on the Bard site development. Last year, $7.4 million in general funds was appropriated to demolish the Bard building and clear the site for temporary landscaping until the site can be further redeveloped. The Department of General Services is seeking a design proposal from RK&K, a civil engineering company, and expects the Board of Public Works to approve the contract in April 2022. And the project is estimated to be completed in spring of 2023. And that concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much for that analysis, and appreciate getting everything situated for the committee. Any questions for from the subcommittee? Okay, thank you very much. We'll now turn to the president of Baltimore City Community College and her team. Madam President, if you want to come up. President McCurdy. We appreciate you being here today. If you want to keep your testimony concise, and it would be wonderful, and just like you always do. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee. We are extremely pleased to be here this afternoon. For the record, I'm Deborah McCurdy, President, Baltimore City Community College. I'm going into just shy of a 3rd year with many changes, transitions, and obvious realignments. I'm joined this afternoon by Mr. Michael Thomas, VP for Workforce Development, also overseeing the facilities area, Kate Dixon, Assistant VP for Facilities, Becky Burrell, VP for Institutional Effectiveness and Planning, and Liesl Jones, Dr. Liesl Jones, VP for Academic Affairs. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, our faculty, our staff, and our students, thank you again for opening up this opportunity to provide this brief testimony in support of the Governor's FY23 capital budget recommendations for BCCC That includes the $9 million for deferred maintenance and $2.186 for the design of the Learning Commons renovation addition. Let me also thank our DLS analyst, Kelly Norton, along with Matthew Klein, for their support and the many calls and emails that have gone back and forth. Thank you again for putting us on the schedule today. We very much appreciate the governor's proposed budget for the college, but we believe as well there are capital priorities at BCCC that we need to address and bring to your attention. We recommend accelerating the 2020 Facilities Master Plan to realize the vision for the campus as well as address major deficiencies in deferred maintenance. In March 2019, a facilities assessment was completed by consulting firm Sightlines, specializing in higher education facilities. The assessment identified $41.3 million backlog in deferred maintenance, $31 million of which were classified as immediate needs requiring attention within 1 to 3 years. We've now passed that time period and still now have escalated needs. The immediate needs include improved campus infrastructure, electrical, HVAC, plumbing, building envelope upgrades, and life safety projects. Until FY22, there had been little or no state investment in deferred maintenance at the college. Lack of funding for routine maintenance has caused tremendous neglect. BCCC has to assume responsibility now for working with the state agencies to turn this around. As far as the DLS recommended actions, Baltimore City Community College appreciates and concurs with the $9 million in deferred maintenance and the $2.186 million for the design of the Learning Commons renovation addition. The Learning Commons renovation in addition and the nursing building renovation in addition were programmed concurrently and submitted to DGS and DBM on March 1, 21 and June 25, 2021 respectively. The college requests that the two building projects begin concurrently as one design contract in the FY23 capital budget to gain efficiencies and improve the student experience. To begin both projects on the same timeline and bid for construction at the same time, the college requests $2.3 to begin design of the nursing renovation in addition. That's in addition to what has already been appropriated or proposed, the $2.186 for the design of the Learning Commons renovation. Additional priorities include the demolition of the North Pavilion and the design and construction of the facilities building. The North Pavilion is one of 3 pavilions that the college acquired some years ago, the North, the South. The North, the West, and the South pavilions. The North Pavilion is now in total disarray, uninhabitable, vandalism, and certainly an eyesore sitting in the heart of the community. We're requesting $1.5 million to demolish the North Pavilion and $6 million for the replacement of the facilities building, which is a trailer built in 2005 and sitting in the heart of the campus. Finally, I want to provide you with an update on the Bard site. We are grateful for these funds and to Governor Hogan and Senate President Ferguson, who provided their support in the FY22 budget, the $7.4 million to demolish the Bard building, where we're going to create temporary landscaping on this site. The college has completed and submitted the final Bard demolition, Part 1 and Part 2 program documents. Those were submitted in December of 2021, and DGS is currently soliciting an A&E proposal to complete construction documents for bidding to demolition. The college requests to retain and utilize any remaining funding from the $7.4 million for the demolition to complete a needs assessment and program document for this site. This would also allow us, as we go forward, to have consideration for co-joining many of our facilities that currently cost the institution about $3 million in leases. Finally, let me conclude. Let me thank you again, Chairman Zucker and Vice Chair McCray. We appreciate, again, being put on the schedule, subcommittee members. As always, we invite you to the college to discuss and see firsthand the needs that exist at BCCC. And let me end up my comments there and open it up, sir, and madams, for your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. You always have a seat at the table. I think Senator McCray has a question or comment.
Dr. McCurdy, just wanted to say thank you first for your leadership, you and your team's leadership. We know the challenges that we face at BCCC. We know that you were brought in specifically to help us shift the trajectory of our important institution that we call Baltimore City Community College. Just wanted to let you know that we're all on this Capital Subcommittee looking for future partnership in reference to addressing a number of the issues that you brought here today with us, so thank you.
Senator Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. Just to follow up on your comments, this is my first time seeing you in person. Good to see you. I don't have access to their testimony. I couldn't find it on the system. Do you? It could be me.
Yeah,
Could be
we can
user.
get you a copy.
Okay, thank
Senator.
you very much, because that was a lot of detail that I wanted to be able to follow up on.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is it clean?
Great. Any other questions for the panel? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and have a great evening, everybody. That concludes today's capital budget hearings. Everyone have a great day. We're adjourned.
Thank you so much.